I'm Diane Rossini. I'm with the City of Easthampton, the DPW, in the engineering department.
And I'm Julie Bisa. I'm a senior environmental scientist with Fuss & O'Neill, which is an engineering firm that's working with the city on this project.
And we're here to talk about stormwater with you guys.
So, Diane, what is stormwater?
Well, anytime it rains, the water comes down from the clouds and lands on the planet. So, stormwater is when the rain lands here and it has to go somewhere.
So, this is a downspout. Some of you probably have these on your houses. And a downspout is one way that water starts to get collected and channeled to different places. So if you have gutters on your house, the water comes off the roof, into the gutters, down the downspout. But then what happens is that it starts to run across hard surfaces or grass in some cases. But in this case, it runs onto the driveway. And then it probably starts to head over this way towards the road. And that's where it becomes DPW's purview.
Once the water comes off the roof, it comes towards the streets and we collect them in a catch basin. A catch basin is where any stormwater will go to head out towards nature.
It's important to know too that catch basins are completely separate from the sewer system that captures the waste from your toilets and your sinks. This is an entirely separate system that only carries rainwater and water that comes off of the roadways.
So be careful what you dump into your catch basin.
In fact, you can see right here that this basin is actually labeled, so it says dump no waste, drains to waterways. And that's to help people understand that these systems are separate. So we know that you all have been learning about watersheds, and watersheds come into play when we're thinking about stormwater as well, because we know and we can sort of trace from topography where all of the stormwater is going to collect and how much of an area is going to contribute to a particular drainage system. So everything that comes down this street and makes its way into this catch basin and the other basins along the road are ultimately going to go down to the end of Cherry Street, and they're going to make their way into Brickyard Brook. So we're going to take you back there now. So you may actually recognize this spot. We're in the Brickyard Brook Conservation Area on the trail, and if you've ever walked in this area, you may have actually seen the spot where all of the water from Cherry Street and some of the other streets in that neighborhood come out. And you may have noticed that it's not in very good condition. So we're going to make our way over there. So, Diane, what is this?
This is a broken piece of pipe that used to be connected to that one.
Oh yeah, look, there's pieces of pipe everywhere. So this outfall actually used to stand somewhere out like where we are, right?
Yes, and there's part of the wall that used to hold the soils back from that bank.
How does this happen?
Well, water's a lot stronger than people think it is. And when we get a lot of water, it moves really fast through the pipe. And it was too fast for this outfall, what we call it, where the water falls into nature, could handle.
So gradually over time, this whole slope has just started to erode away and sections of the pipe fall off as that happens?
Yep, and the
Wow.
soil too.
Easthampton has really sandy soils, which actually make it more likely for things like this to happen because it's very easy for them to erode away.
Yes.
So what can we do about a situation like this?
Well, back a few years ago, we probably would have just built it the way it was before. But now we're trying to use different techniques called green infrastructure to build back better.
So our plan for this site actually involves restoring this slope so that it looks as much like nature as we can, but is also stable. And so the way that we're going to do that is by bringing in new material, and we're going to kind of wrap it in like these fabric blankets that will help to anchor it into the slope. So we're going to rebuild this slope and then bring the outfall back out to about here where it should be, and then create some space here on the ground that it can kind of flow over some rock and splash and have some of that force you were talking about be dispersed a little bit so that it won't continue to erode the stream. And that's really important for the stream itself too, because all of this sediment and soil and material that gets carried into the stream, and obviously all of this debris, isn't good for the health of aquatic organisms and other things that are living in this stream system. And the stormwater that comes out of the pipes also carries other types of pollutants like excess nitrogen and phosphorus, which get swept off of the yards and people's properties up in the neighborhood, and then that also gets carried into the stream.
So what is the green infrastructure portion of this project?
Yeah, so the green infrastructure portion of this project is going to do two things. Like I was saying, we're going to rebuild the slope here where the problem is really evident. But then most importantly, we're going to go back up to the neighborhood and we're going to put in a lot of green infrastructure practices upslope that will help to limit the volume of water that actually makes its way to this pipe. So basically what we're trying to do is, rather than letting the water run across all of those hard surfaces and into the catch basins we showed you, we're going to infiltrate as much of it into the ground and let it soak in place so that there's less water actually coming out of this place and less of that force and erosive power that causes these kind of problems. The volume is important too, because when you have a storm, it's not just happening in one place up in our neighborhood, it's happening all over the city, right? And so there's already a lot of water coming down the stream from other places where it's coming off of, these natural slopes, other outfalls that are upstream. And so one of the things that green infrastructure helps to do is to kind of slow down when the water from this neighborhood gets added to all the other water that's already flowing through. And that helps to control the overall problems that we see with erosion and all of the force that comes from that large volume of water.
Basically, all the water isn't pushing itself through the pipe all at one time. It's slowly coming down here and making its way to the stream in a way it can handle.
Right. And you had a really nice example that it's a little bit like the water down here is taking the freeway, whereas the water up there now, if we send it through green infrastructure, is kind of meandering along back roads and taking a slower path. Some of it's soaking in along the way, and some of it's ultimately getting here, but it's taking a slower route. So I want to point out that we're now about 25 or 30 feet downstream of the outfall that we were showing you. And right here in front of me is a section of the pipe that fell off as this has sort of collapsed and degraded over the last probably several decades. And I don't know if you can actually see it, but this is embedded in the stream bed, and that's partly because all of the material that's come off of the slope and the hillside there has wound up in the stream. And so you've not only got the chunks of pipe, but you've got all that soil kind of now clogging up the stream bed, and this isn't really the natural stream bed that we would have expected. And this isn't really quite how Brickyard Brook should look or be functioning right now. So part of this project is also to try to restore the health of the stream.
And you can do your part by only putting what is supposed to go in a catch basin into a catch basin. The water that you put into that catch basin ends up in this brook.
And that includes things like the soap from washing your car, or anything else that you're doing with a hose in your driveway if it's picking up material, whether that's, maybe sand that you used in the winter or salt that you used to help melt ice. All of those sorts of materials ultimately make it into the streams in our backyards.
So the first part of any construction project is to do the design and permitting. And the beginning of that is surveying the area.
And one of the things that we have to look at if we're doing any work near water resources is to delineate those and delineate any wetland areas, because they're protected by the state of Massachusetts under the Wetlands Protection Act. So you can see there are flags delineating where the wetlands are in this landscape. And if you kind of look around, you'll see those all throughout the woods. And you may have seen these wandering around town and other places too. And those flags almost always indicate that there's some kind of wetland assessment that's been done in order to prepare for, or at least do some planning for a project. I want to point out too, I've got my foot here on the head wall that used to be part of our outfall. I think we mentioned that earlier. So you can see that either the outfall used to be all the way over here, or this may have gotten pushed by the force of water over the last number of years. But at any rate, we've got debris from this outfall spread kind of all around this area. When we're talking about wetlands, plants are a really important part of recognizing where wetlands are. So all of this stuff at my feet is actually skunk cabbage. And if you walk on it and crush it, it releases kind of a skunky smell, which is one of the ways that you can recognize it if you're not real familiar with what the leaves look like. But that's a definite indicator of wetlands. And so you can kind of see, just looking around me where you can see that plant, that you can kind of see where the wetland edge is. We also have in here a number of invasive plants. So invasives are plants that are not native to our area, and they have characteristics and traits that tend to make them particularly good at coming in and taking over. So this is something called burning bush or winged euonymus. And this is a plant that for many decades people have been planting around their houses as a landscape plant. It's really pretty in the fall, it turns bright red, but it has escaped into the wilderness, and now we find it all over our forests where it's not supposed to be. And it starts to push out other species that are native to our ecosystems. It's important to flag where our wetlands are because, like I said, they're protected by the state under the Wetlands Protection Act. And when any project happens, we need to understand how much we're going to impact those wetland resource areas. So by flagging them, we're able to show them on the plans, also show them to the contractor and construction workers that are going to be out doing the project so that they know where the sensitive areas are. And we do, as we go through a permitting process, we have to tally up the square footage of impact areas and also present and meet certain standards about how those areas are going to be protected or restored, or if we're going to permanently impact an area, then we have to show, in many cases, how we're going to replicate that area and all of the ecosystem services that it provides somewhere else. So ecosystem services, I don't know if that's a term that you all have learned about, but that basically is talking about all of the services like water filtration, groundwater recharge, species habitat, all of those different services that our streams and rivers and wetlands provide for us. Also, they provide space for water to spread out during flood events. So this is actually a perfect example because we're standing next to the stream, which currently is about a foot or so below us. But if we got a really big rain event, the stream would come up and that water would spill out into this wetland area. And that would both slow that water down and help with erosion, but also we'd see that water sort of soaking into the ground here and being slowed down by all of the plants that it flows through. We mentioned earlier that there are multiple outfalls and places where stormwater enters the stream. So we've walked just a little bit downstream from where we were showing you before, and this is another outfall that brings water from a different part of the neighborhood. And you can see that this one's in a whole lot better shape than the one that we were talking about before. So this is what our outfall upstream might have looked like when it was new and original. You can see there was a sort of a flat concrete wall called a head wall. You can see that the pipe is still intact in that wall, which is a good sign. And you can see that there's some distance between here and the stream too. We're about maybe 20 feet away from the stream. So there's some room for the water to kind of trickle and make its way out to the stream, but it's not dumping directly into Brickyard Brook like our other outfall, and it hasn't taken all of the material and soil with it. So this is a much better example of what a standard outfall should look like. But we're still going to try to improve on this case when we do our replacement and repair work, because like we said earlier, we're going to be using that green infrastructure approach and trying to both make a more natural outfall, but also be limiting the water that's coming out of it by the work that we're going to do up in the neighborhood.